Mermaids with an S by me, Kaylee May. I was watching videos of mermaid performers in amusement parks. You know those women, like the ones, they've got latex tails, they swim around in tanks for tourists? I don't know, I just thought it was really cool. And I know there are lots of subreddits for niche hobbies, so I decided to look it up. I looked at r/mermaid, but it was just illustrations. Like, yeah, they were nice illustrations, but it wasn't what I was after. And then, of course, I realized my mistake. I've been looking for a community of mermaids, as in plural, lots of them, you know? So I get to typing r/mermaids. Mermaids with an S, right? And the first image, though, was like this humanoid looking creature with grey skin on a table. Its green tail was still intact, but the blubber on the poor creature's ribs had just been ripped to shreds. There were hacksaws in the corner of the room, and the photo was grainy but had this vibe of like an abandoned hospital. And then as I scrolled, it was just much of the same. Each picture was of a mutilated humanoid sea creatures with the same greenish lighting, windowless rooms, and these like rusted but clinical furnishings. And I couldn't tell what the purpose of these images were. Art? An elaborate prank? Guerrilla marketing for a film? I just learnt about ARGs, so maybe it was something like that. And so I started looking for answers, but all I found was ongoing debate. Like, one commenter would argue that, obviously it's just cool renderings because there's hardly any blood, and if they were actually real people, they would bleed, so these creatures are obviously not real. And then someone would comment that they couldn't be renders or edits because there were no artifacts in the image, like beside the grain in the photos, but that was due to low lighting. But with QAnon and all these other conspiracy theories floating around, it was really easy to blow off those wanting to believe it to be real as some kind of modern day, like Blair Witch style hysteria. But something just didn't sit right with me. So I began compiling the images together to try and identify anything that could lead me to where these images were being taken. Reddit mods were alerted, but all that was done was that the subreddit was marked not safe for work for graphic imagery. As far as they were concerned, it was no different to a horror movie or a special effects subreddit. And slowly the subscriber count started to dwindle as people lost interest in the mystery. You know, like Geetus. Remember Geetus? It doesn't matter. So it had been solved as far as the public were concerned. It was just some kind of artistic weirdo making hyper-realistic sculptures, Ron Muir style, I guess. But I couldn't. Not me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I got this sense of conviction I'd never felt before. From the moment that first photo where my eyes connected to this dead but somehow pleading eyes of this poor creature flayed across the table in some forgotten tomb, there was this voice in my mind that spoke louder than any of my other thoughts. I don't really know how to explain it. Like it wasn't an audible voice. At least I didn't think I was going crazy. But it drowned out my inner monologue. It's like it's oh okay no so so it's like that voice that takes over when you have like a salad in front of you but you know you have like cake in the fridge. It was like that, right? So every day I refresh my page for new content, and every day I scan my archives for new clues. And the content creator who posted the most must have gotten scared of losing what limelight they'd been receiving from taunting the public. Maybe they got a sick thrill by watching these irrational thinkers gaslight, you know, the truth tellers. Maybe they wanted to get caught. Whatever it was, they got sloppy. And that's when the videos began. In the beginning, the videos began at a white rusted door that slid open and led to the main operating theatre used in most of the photographs. And it seemed too well created to be a render or animation. The green lights would flicker, and I began to notice that the overhead lights would just ever so slightly move from side to side. They would show the scalpel carving the flesh, only dead things at first, grey, limp, lifeless flesh, and these clear juices would spill as the scalpel sliced through these poor souls, like forgive the visuals, but it was like scissors running through aluminium foil. And I remember because I saved that video. I watched it on repeat. I studied it. And then I had an idea to put headphones in. So I called in a favor from one of my friends who mixes demo CDs for local bands. I couldn't hear it through my MacBook speakers, but when I put on the headphones, there was this noise in the background. This screaming, groaning, clicks that sounded like what's the word? Like echolocation, but I didn't want to get ahead of myself. So with each new video, I would listen. And then with each passing day, I would cry. I would cry in anger. I would cry in frustration. I would cry in surrender for those poor souls that needed to be saved, knowing every day that I failed was another day that a poor creature would be massacred for a purpose I had no understanding of. Didn't know what it was for. Was entertainment? People had been in contact with local authorities. People had been sending them videos and clues about possible locations in every country, every police force, every special task force, every politician, and they just would meet our little group of truth seekers with hand waving. Sorry. But they began to make jokes about us on morning television. How someone who actually believed our mermaids was proof of how easy it could be for governments to brainwash its people with deep fake technology and that it needed to be banned. We were labeled crazy, psycho, stupid, and the public conversation just turned to banning AI technology or anything else that could be used to, air quotes, trick the public, whether it be maliciously or as a prank, as clearly r/mermaids had done. Then to really seal the deal, one of the head moderators of r/mermaids had the courage to break his silence and unmask himself to the public. And nobody found it odd that this man had no digital footprint, no social media, no LinkedIn, no previous movies or credits from short films. The filmmaker, just let that one sink in. But this was all waved away as a man being an introverted, absurdist filmmaker who was just always worried about being misunderstood, and now the truth tellers were showing this poor guy that his anxieties were right and that they needed to have their cyberbullying campaign stopped. But while he was on television one morning, a new video popped up. And this time the video began at a hatch that was opened with a pressure release valve. And this time the camera was strapped to the chest of the person. Their hands were Sorry, this is where I get excited. right? Because their hands were visible and there was no way that they could be the hands of the mods of r/mermaids because they were slender. Unlike the oaf on TV, they were elegant. The person hoisted themselves up on a small step, they opened the hatch, and then they descended down the ladder into a laboratory. The outside of the space was shown. It was blurry, but I took as many screen captures as I could, and I was not the only one. They had gotten too brave, too bold, and perhaps they assumed that no one would be able to tell where they were situated in the middle of nowhere. But now I knew why I'd been so convicted to follow this mystery. I had come from nowhere. The bunya pines, the volcanic rocks with their little jagged square formations, the mangroves, the holes that littered the sand where the crabs would burrow and wait out the tides. I knew that beach. That was my beach. I had grown up there. I played there after school every day by myself. The ocean was my only comfort. And back then, the sand would keep my secrets. And the birds or the fish in the rock pools, they never told me I was too weird to be friends with. But from the Misty Mountains to the Escarpa Eye, in the 90s, I had given every inch of that foreshore a silly name that 8-year-old me thought was cool as hell. That hatch was new. But I mean, I hadn't been there in over a decade. And then I don't remember how I got there. But I was standing at the top of the beach, looking out over the rocks. Right along the foreshore, there's these trees, aptly named the Thrones because the tree roots would jut out like from the cliffs onto the sand, and they made these small, comfortable nests. And I watched as slowly the tide crept out across the rocks over the horizon, and that's when the valve from the video glinted, and I sprinted. And there was no code, there was no lock, it was just a valve. So I went up those steps, I flung open that door, and I almost slid down the ladder. I was met with low green lighting, and it smelled like rotten fish and chlorine. There was a door to my right, this big white door, like at a bookshop. It was cold to the touch, and I couldn't open it. I'm weak. I was so weak. I started feeling dizzy. I wasn't in control anymore. I followed a hallway with a tiled floor that I'm sure used to be white. I could hear the sounds from the video, but they were louder now. Vivid. They bounced off the walls of the corridor. Then at the end of the corridor was the white door I'd become so familiar with from all of those videos. And I opened it. It was easy. It was so easy. I was in the room where I had seen so many creatures who had entered before me perish. The room was cold, clinical. I understood why everything gently swayed now, for I was swaying too. I'd always imagined submarines to be somewhat smaller, warmer, cozy. And that's when I heard the voices coming down the hallway. There was a door on the opposite wall where I'd came from, and I ran and tried to gently close it behind me so I had time to hide, but it clicked loudly, and the room was dark, and I fumbled around to find a light. As I reached into my pockets, I realized I hadn't brought anything with me. I didn't have a torch. I didn't have a camera or a recorder. No phone. I don't know why. It was just me, and I had to escape because I had to tell people. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I began to see tanks and tubs. As the rushing blood faded from my ears, I could hear breathing. I could hear the clicking bouncing from wall to wall. I could hear groans. Quickly the door flew open, and 2 men in suits and 1 in a lab coat flicked on the harsh fluorescent lights, and I crouched at the back of the room behind one of the tubs. And there was a hand draped outside the rim. And I realized it was the same hand from the video. That same elegant hand. They hadn't gotten sloppy. The man circled around me. They looked at the unconscious woman in the bathtub and then to me. Behind them were tanks of different creatures in states of living, suffering, and straight decay. One chuckled and said it was fortunate they now had 2 whistleblowers. It meant they had 2 chances to transplant dolphin vocal cords in order to try and better communicate with the creatures that NASA had found in the deep underwater trenches. They lamented that their attempts to add human lungs to the creatures from the trenches had failed so many times. I don't know where I got the strength from, but I launched myself upwards and I grabbed a Bunsen burner. Year 9 science finally came in handy. It had this long pipe and it was already attached to a gas source, so I turned it on. And as I hoped, there it was. I began to yell threats that if they came near me, I would burn and brand them like the criminals they were, and they backed off. I sighed in relief, and I looked around trying to calculate what I would do next. I watched them slip out of the room, but they soon appeared behind an illuminated glass wall in another area of the holding bay. But they were yelling now. They were pounding on the glass, telling me to turn off the burner, and I slowly walked towards them. Because I had the power now. I was in control. One reached for a microphone as I watched the air in the room appear to move the way it does above hot roads in the Queensland summer. Then he thanked me. Their existing experiments, chained in tubs and tanks, were not in water. They were in a concoction of chemicals that allowed those from the depths and those from the surface have their inner biology stabilized regardless of the depths or location of the submarine. They knew there was a risk of it being flammable, but they didn't expect the clear flames that I'd now let loose, sucking the air out of the room as I felt my skin dry and tighten. They walked away as I tried to scream in pain, but all I could feel was unbearable heat where the oxygen in my body used to occupy. I watched everything around me shrivel and blacken and disappear by a force I couldn't even see. Every shred of evidence would just simply get discarded in the wall of the ocean. The world would never see what they did to me. And nobody would believe what they did to us. I just wanted to see mermaids.